Stephen Meyer of the Discovery Institute, and author of Darwin's Doubt, the explosive origin of animal life and the case for intelligent design. Dr. Meyer, what was Darwin's Doubt?
It's a great place to start the conversation because that's what I do in the book, is I tell the story of this salient doubt that Darwin had about his own theory and what's become of it, the way it's grown up to become illustrative of a major crisis in evolutionary theory. The doubt he had was about something called the Cambrian Explosion, which is the geologically sudden appearance or abrupt appearance of most of the major groups of animals in a geological period called the Cambrian, quite a long time ago, about 530 million years ago. And Darwin was aware of this problem, and in The Origin of Species, he addressed it and acknowledged that it was a problem for his theory. And basically the problem is that, as he understood it, life should unfold in a very slow and gradual way. He depicted the history of life, in fact, as a branching tree that was in which the base of the tree, or the trunk of the tree, represented the first simple one-celled organism, and all the terminal branches represented all the forms of life that we see today. All the connecting branches represented all the intermediate forms that should have arisen through the vast eons of time. He also thought that that process should take very slowly because his mechanism of natural selection, acting on random variations, also had to act very slowly. The variations, as he conceived of them, would be small, minute, incremental. If they were huge or big, then that would result in deformed animals that couldn't survive, and therefore the process of natural selection and variation had to work very slowly and gradually. And yet what he witnessed in the fossil record, and what scientists at the time knew, was that the first major groups of complex animals came on the scene fully formed very abruptly in the sedimentary layers. And this was contrary to what he thought the picture of the history of life should be, and it was also contrary to the way his mechanism of natural selection, as he conceived it, as it should act. So it was a real puzzle to him. He said, therefore, that the Cambrian explosion was, he said, a valid objection to the views here entertained. And that was his doubt. And what I do in the book is tell what's become of that doubt.
Where did Charles Darwin write that?
Right in The Origin of Species. It was one of the things that he expressed very modestly as far as the limitations of his theory. I opened the book by saying that when he finished his masterpiece, The Origin of Species, he thought he had explained every clue but one. And the Cambrian Explosion was the one big thing that he thought he knew that he had not yet explained. Now, he had an idea about what might later explain it. He thought that eventually paleontologists would find that sequence of intervening forms in the lower pre-Cambrian strata. But as I explain in the book, subsequent fossil finds have actually intensified the mystery rather than alleviated it.
Where did the name Cambrian come from?
It was one of the names of the geological layers. Cambria is a place in Wales, and the earliest locale for Cambrian fossils came from Wales, and so the name was given from that location. There are now Cambrian finds, fossil finds all around the world. The most famous are in Canada and Burgess Shale, and one in southern China near a city named Chengjiang, the Maoshishan Shale.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you why you included pictures of Chengjiang,
exactly.
China?
Yeah. Well, I'm telling the story of what happened to the Darwin's doubt. And there's really two mysteries that I address in the book. One is the mystery of the missing ancestral fossils. And that mystery has become more acute because of the subsequent fossil finds that have been made since Darwin's time. He expected to find the missing ancestrals in those lower Precambrian layers. But what's been found instead is more Cambrian animals, new forms that were not known in Darwin's time, each of which in turn, or most of which in turn, lack any ancestral forms in the Precambrian rock, any discernible connection to those presumed ancestors. So the mystery's become more acute for that reason. It's also become more acute for a couple of other reasons. One, the period of time in which the most explosive period of the Cambrian explosion has gradually shrunk down to about 5 to 6 million years. There's a seam in the rock, one of the stages of the Cambrian period in which between 13 and 16 new animal phyla come into the rock record very suddenly. And that makes it even more difficult to explain the origin of all that new form and structure. And the other thing that's made the mystery more acute is that for a long time people thought, well, maybe we're not finding those missing ancestral forms because they were too soft. They were soft-bodied creatures rather than hard-bodied creatures that are easier to fossilize. And maybe they were too small, so there was this idea that the missing ancestrals were an artifact of our incomplete sampling of the fossil record. But in that same southern Chinese fossil location, paleontologists have found in the lower Precambrian strata, beneath the strata that document the sudden appearance of the major animal forms, they found sponge embryo fossils, small, microscopic, and soft-tissued animals. And that's really a mystery because it shows that the depositional environment was perfectly suited to preserving the ancestral forms of all those other forms that are lacking ancestors, and yet they weren't found. And so that's really put to rest the idea that we didn't find them because we were either not looking hard enough or because the environment in which the rocks and the fossils were fossilized were not suitable to preserve them.
So therefore, Stephen Meyer, we have this mystery.
We got the big mystery.
How do you explain it?
Well, maybe there's one other thing I should say first, because the mystery has two parts. And the first part is the mystery of the missing fossil, but what the book addresses is really the deeper mystery. And that's the mystery of, it's essentially an engineering problem. How would you build an animal, or any of these complex animals? There's 23 odd phyla that first arise in the fossil record. One of the most famous phyla are the arthropods. They include critters like trilobite. And I've got a little fossil visual aid, if you'll permit me. It's
I'll hold it up for the camera.
And it's those are 3 trilobites. One of the amazing things about trilobites is that they had compound eyes, and in this particular fossil, you can actually see the compound structure in the eye. And so paleontologists were aware of this exquisite functional integration, this functional complexity, right from the very dawn of animal life. And that raises a question quite independent of, well, where's all the missing ancestors? What mechanism could build something this complex, in particular in the amount of time allowed by the fossil record? And what I do in the book is I examine not just the Darwinian mechanism, but the modern neo-Darwinian mechanism, which is a little more sophisticated. It doesn't just emphasize natural selection and variations in the general sense, it emphasizes natural variations and mutations in genetic material, the way that modern evolutionary theorists would understand the mechanism that generates large-scale change. And what I show in the book is that there are a bunch of reasons to doubt that that mechanism has the creative power that's long been attributed to it. One of which is what we now know about the importance of information, of genetic and other forms of biological information to the maintenance and to the construction of animal forms. I used to teach a lot of freshmen when I was a college professor. And
what did you teach?
I taught the philosophy of science. And I would ask them, if you want to give your computer a new function, what do you have to give it? We've been talking a lot about information at this conference, and they would immediately get it. They're young, they're in the techie generation, say, well, you need code or a program or instructions or software, all of which are correct answers. Well, it turns out that the same thing is true in life. If you want to build, if you want to generate life in the first place from non-living chemicals, you have to have information in the form of DNA to build the proteins that makes cells viable. But if you want to build a new form of life from a pre-existing form, and this is what Darwin was trying to explain, you've also got to have actually reams of digital code. You need new tissues, new organs, therefore new types of cells, and each new type of cell needs new proteins, and those proteins in turn require information. So the Cambrian explosion is not just an explosion of new form and structure, new animals. It's an explosion of information, of digital code and other forms of biological information. And what I show in the book is that natural selection and random mutations is a singularly inept mechanism for generating new information. Mutations, random changes in code or software, we know from our own experience, tends to degrade information, not generate new software programs or operating systems. And the same thing turns out to be true in the living world. If you start mutating sections of genetic text, you're going to degrade that information, and mathematically it turns out to be extremely improbable that you would ever be able to find even new genes or proteins in the time allowed by the evolutionary process.
Where did you teach?
I taught at Whitworth University in Washington State.
And what kind of college is that?
It's a
Liberal
arts college.
Christian-oriented college?
Yeah, Christian-oriented. And
where did you get your PhD?
I got it from Cambridge University.